Welcome to the Golden State Media Concepts, America's Still Beautiful podcast, a weekly news podcast covering all the top positive and uplifting news stories. Are you tired of the same old news? Are you sick of the seemingly endless political spin and negativity? We cover stories that will inspire, uplift, and remind you of the good in the world. Tune into the Golden State Media Concepts, America's Still Beautiful podcast to get all the great and positive news stories of today.
GSMC America's Still Beautiful podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Emily Ferrier, here to bring you some uplifting stories in these trying times. To start us off today, I thought in honor of Valentine's Day, which it may be a day of romance for some, but for others might be a reminder of loneliness, I wanted to start with a story of 29-year-old Seth Stewart, who spent the last 8 years making sure that local widows, single women, and military spouses in Spokane, Washington are not forgotten about during the holiday. Every morning on Valentine's Day, Stewart and his brothers deliver single red roses to the homes of women who have lost their spouses or had their significant others deployed overseas. Stewart keeps a list of the women and mothers in his area who he delivers to every year. In the weeks leading up to the holiday, Stewart asks Facebook readers to send him additional names of women who might need a pick-me-up so he can add them to the list. Stewart says that he and his brothers generally deliver between 400 and 500 free roses every year with the help of a delivery driving team. But this year, they've delivered 700 roses to women across the region. They're also hoping to deliver many more roses in the years to come, especially after witnessing the emotional impact that it has on the recipients. Every single year we do this, there are always one or two women who break down sobbing because it means so much to them, Stewart told CNN. If you would like to nominate someone to receive a rose next Valentine's Day, you can send Stewart a message via his Facebook Rose Rush page. I absolutely loved this story. I just thought it was the sweetest thing for this young man to do, and I would love to hear about more people doing that. If you have any stories of people like that in your neighborhood, please let us know. But also, in honor of Valentine's Day for our first segment, I wanted to do the good news from February 14th in history. So from Valentine's Day throughout history, here are a couple bits of good news. 100 years ago today, the League of Women Voters was founded as a nonpartisan organization to advocate for U.S. voters, ensure inclusive access to polls, activate the electorate for vote through voter registration drives, and educate the public through sponsoring debates. Women didn't have the representation in the U.S. government a century ago, but the League was founded in Chicago 6 months before the 19th Amendment was ratified and women won the vote. They set out to help 20 million women carry out their new responsibilities as voters. In the 70s and 80s, the League regularly sponsored presidential debates which focused on nonpartisan issues and would inform voters. As candidates increasingly demanded partisan conditions, however, the League withdrew its sponsorship of the national debates in 1988. But the League's 1,000 officers around the country still organize many debates and forums for local and state elections today. In 1993, the group's campaign for national legislation to reform voter registration resulted in a passage of the National Voter Registration Act, known as the Motor Voter Bill, which enabled citizens to register motor vehicles agencies automatically as well by mail. After the 2000 election exposed many problems facing the election system, the League began to work on reforms, working closely with Civil Rights Coalition LWV, helped draft and pass the Help America Vote Act, HAVA, which established provisional balloting, requirements of updating voting systems, and the Election Assistance Commission. So that was the year 2000, so 20 years ago today. And there's a big election coming up, so make sure that you're exercising your rights to vote that were fought for by our past. More good news on this date. President Franklin Roosevelt met with King Ibn of Saudi Arabia, opening U.S.-Saudi diplomatic relations on February 14th in 1945, after U.S. First Lady Jackie Kennedy spent a year restoring the White House with historical furnishings that were missing when she arrived. 80 million people tuned into television to watch her give a tour featuring her restorations, and the changes became widely popular on February 14th in 1962. And in 1967, Aretha Franklin recorded the award-winning version of Otis Redding's Respect. The iconic hit was rated by Rolling Stone magazine as number 5 on their 500 greatest hits of all time. 50 years ago today, The Who performed at Leeds University in England, and the resulting recorded Live at Leeds has been cited as the most important live rock album of all time. And the school's dining hall was commemorated with a plaque as a UK national landmark in 1970. CNN reporter Jeremy Levin was freed from captivity in Lebanon in 1985. The first of 24 satellites of the Global Positioning System, GPS, were placed into orbit on today's date in 1989. The spacecraft near Shoemaker entered orbit around asteroid 433 Eros, the first spacecraft to orbit an asteroid in 2000. On today's date, YouTube was launched by 3 former PayPal employees as a video sharing website and soon became the largest search engine in the world and the main source of viral videos on the web in 2005. And finally, on this day in 1818, Frederick Douglass, the former slave who became an abolitionist author, dazzling orator, and salesman, was born. He was born in Maryland sometime around this date in 1818, which is the one that he chose to celebrate as his birthday. Douglass grew to stand as a living counterexample to slaveholders' arguments that slaves lacked intellectual capabilities and function as independent American citizens. He was an advisor for President Abraham Lincoln on issues like African Americans in the military, and detailed his remarkable life in the 1845 autobiography Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass and American Slaves. Pick up a copy of that. And on this date in 1894, comedian Jack Benny was born in Chicago. Leading 20th century entertainment of the stage and screen, Benny portrayed himself as stingy and vain and played violin tenderly and sometimes badly. He was known for his comic timing and the ability to cause laughter with a silent pause or single expression, like his signature move, an exasperated, well. His popular radio and TV programs from 1932 until his death in 1974 were a major influence on the sitcom genre. Mary Livingstone, his wife and radio partner as well, played a wisecracking secretary who made fun of Benny in their act and proved to be a talented comedian herself. So those are just some of the things that happened on Valentine's Day in today's history. I hope you guys all had an excellent Valentine's Day. We do have a couple more stories about Valentine's Day coming up. Obviously, with that being the day, that is what's dominating in the news cycles. So when we come back, we're going to talk about a famous tree in Germany that is fabled to help people find true love. So we'll see if that's true. when we return from our break. So stay tuned for that.
The GSMC Life and Happiness Podcast takes you on a journey of exploration. We'll discuss tried and true methods alongside the latest trends of how to best live your life to its fullest and happiest. From psychology to meditation, science to self-help books, the GSMC Life and Happiness Podcast will help you to discover what makes you happy and how you can live life being the best you possible. Download the GSMC Life and Happiness Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Back from the break. So before we left, we had talked about one beautiful act of kindness that a boy did, giving roses to people that have their spouses overseas. And then we talked a little bit about the history of Valentine's Day. And now, if you haven't felt the spark of love through online dating apps, as they feel a little impersonal from time to time, it may be your time to sow your seeds in better places, like under the loving limbs of a tree in Germany. The bridegroom's oak tree is fabled to have a remarkable history of helping people find true love. It started with a couple in 1890 who used a hole in the tree to pass notes to each other in secret. As more and more people told the story of the star-crossed lovers, admirers began using the 600-year-old tree as a mailbox to deliver their own letters of hope to their future soulmates. The tree was given its own postal address in 1927 and now receives roughly 1,000 letters per year. People visit the tree and read and take home letters that look interesting and become pen pals, and sometimes they even get married. Karl Heinz Martens has delivered letters to the tree as a mailman for 30 years, and he believes that the ancient oak has a certain kind of unparalleled magic. I do believe that there is something magical about the tree. He says, this aura, this tranquility that you have here, this serenity cannot be matched by the internet. I'm getting goosebumps just thinking about it. So him saying about it being a little different than meeting people on the internet. Obviously, it is different meeting people on the internet. I don't know if you've tried. I think it feels a little impersonal. Personally, it's hard for me to really feel like I'm getting to know someone on the internet. But it is one of the most profound changes in the life of the U.S. and, of course, the rest of the world. Instead of meeting our partners at school, work, or friends, family, or church, or things that we used to meet people, many of us now meet them online. In fact, 39% of heterosexual couples that got together in the U.S. in 2017 met online, according to a study that was just released by psychologist Michael Rosenfeld and Sonia Hossain of Stanford University and Ruben Thomas of the University of New Mexico. This was also the case for more than 60% of same-sex couples in that year. So that makes online dating by far the most common way that American couples now meet. The data also shows that between 1995 and 2017, meeting through friends saw the largest decline from 33% of couples at the start of that period to just 20% at the end. It used to be that finding a partner is something that one did with their community. Now it's basically an individual quest. This has also created a $4 billion plus industry to help people on that quest. Thomas and his counterparts' research paper is currently under review for publication in an academic journal. The data in the study came from How Couples Meet and Stay Together survey, which is the most comprehensive data collected on romantic relationships in the U.S. The survey allows for multiple answers to questions about how people met. So a recent rise of people meeting at bars and restaurants is not down to serendipity, but more people arranged to meet for dinner or a drink via online dating sites. The study finds that the share of couples meeting online has doubled since 2009. Since the technology hasn't improved that much since 1990s and 2000, says Thomas, he thinks that the explanation is that online dating has finally become culturally acceptable. There's no longer that much stigma about meeting a partner online, and a few now view dating online as unsafe. People used to make up stories about how they met, so they wouldn't have to admit that they met online, but now people embrace it, says Thomas. He and his fellow researchers present several other notable findings about the rise in online dating. They explain that it's not phone apps, but rather websites accessed via computers that account for most of the online relationships created in 2017, although that also may be changing. They also note that the share of people who met first online who were previously strangers rose from about 81% in 2009 to almost 90% in 2017. Finally, they note that online couples don't appear to be any more likely to break up than those who met in real life. Tom says that people often underestimate the huge cultural shift that dating has had on society. Research also suggests that online dating has led to more interracial marriages, more couples from different religious backgrounds, and from levels of education, and pairings from partners who tend to be closer in age, due to probably the settings that allow you to change your preferred age on the dating app itself. So we've known for a long time that this has been the more common way to meet people nowadays. So it's interesting to see the statistics. You can see the full statistics if you look at the survey online. The study being How Couples Met and Stay Together survey. It's very interesting if you want to look at the stats and see just how much it's shifted culturally, even since like 1990, which for me, for everyone, doesn't feel like that long ago. So I recommend that you guys look that up to get the full statistics of it. However, all of that said, it is still pretty beautiful and sweet to hear about the letter tree in Germany that was given its own postal address in 1997 or 1927. Sorry about that. And receives 1,000 letters per year. Still receives letters, and some people, still meet people via this tree and collecting a letter and writing each other and falling in love. Actually, if you're skeptical about the tree's ability, that's okay. But you should also know that the man who delivered letters for the tree, if you remember, his name's Carl Haynes Martins, delivered the mail to the tree for 30 years, and he believes that the ancient oak has the magic. So if you're skeptical about this, you should know that he is happily married to a woman who sent him a letter through the tree after she saw him on an interview on TV. So that's a little bit the tree, right? And a little bit also modern technology intervening in a way, because she did see him on TV first. That's almost more of a Sleepless in Seattle story, which is a great Valentine's Day movie to watch. I know I watched it on Valentine's Day. It's one of my favorites. I'm fine with that. It's a very beautiful story. I would like to know your Valentine's Day traditions. Are you a movie watcher? Are you a wine and a chocolate kind of person? Do you go out for dinner with your spouse or your significant other, or do you stay home and cook? Do you have a particular thing that you like to do with them? And how did you meet Are you thinking, yeah, meeting online is the way to be, or are you a meeting in person is the way to be kind of guy? Yeah, I'm interested to know. When we come back, a little bit more on Valentine's Day when we return.
This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
Welcome back. So when we left off, we were talking about a tree that is bringing people together through love. And now we do have another sort of Valentine's Day love story, but it does start out as something else. So bear with me. The love story is coming. So first off, a young woman who's been differently abled has been given a new lease of life thanks to her beloved assistance dog, who helps her out around the house and even pays for her shopping. Every day, Sally Whitney gets the help she needs to live through her Labrador named Ethan. The service dog helps her with dozens of normal tasks like getting dressed and even fetching food from the fridge. Since the 31-year-old has violent seizures lasting several hours, she used to need carers to monitor her every move and help with everyday chores, but thanks to Ethan, the academic researcher is fulfilling her dreams with a new sense of freedom and independence. I cannot imagine my life without Ethan. He helps me from the moment I get up until the moment I go to bed, and he's with me all night. In the morning, he helps me to the bathroom, I have a shower, and he'll close the door behind me. If I drop the shampoo, he picks it up. And he gets me a towel. Then he goes to the bathroom, opens the drawer and gets my pants out, and he always goes for pink lacy ones. It's impressive. You know, when we get home, I'll say, "Ethan, boots," and he waddles over, and you can see him thinking, he has to put the boots down before he can open the door and pick them up again. And then he'll take his own jacket off. He undoes the Velcro and takes it off right away. So the dog Ethan has a huge vocabulary. He can fetch items that Sally requests from the fridge by tugging on a rope attached to the door handle. The black lab, who turned 5 years old on Christmas Day, also calls the lift. He helps with laundry. He makes contactless payments when she goes shopping. Whitney, who exclusively uses a wheelchair, says, "It's amazing. I could say purse, he goes into my bag, finds a card, and jumps up onto my knee. If I say touch, he leans over to pay. He is very excited when it beeps. He gets the receipt. He breaks it off with his mouth, and everyone claps and does a pose, and he pricks his ears up. He loves the attention. The assistance dog, of course, helps Sally stay alive by spotting the early signs of a seizure and running over to get help. If I jerk, pass out, or fall, he'll leave the room and get help because of my carer or my husband, Ed. Because of their bond between Ethan and I, he's more perceptive to my symptoms than I am. Recently, I was in the bathroom. For some reason, he started nudging my face, threw open the bathroom door, and found my carer. And then I became dizzy. When I was about to fall, my carer arrived and caught me. Whitney was diagnosed with lupus, an autoimmune disease, which means that her own immune system attacks her organs and tissues. 4 years later, she was further diagnosed with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, a condition which means that the tissues that should hold her organs in place are stretchy and fragile. She is a former medical student that had to have carers by her side around the clock and struggled with the emotional pressure that came with that. In 2015, Sally contacted the Disability and Service Dog Charity and Canine Partners, and they matched her with Ethan when he was just a 1-year-old puppy. Before Ethan came along, I was pitied or invisible. Some people would say, "You're too beautiful to be in a wheelchair," and ask me why I was disabled. But Ethan, that's a stepping stone in between. He draws people to me, but people I can have actual conversations with, other adults that don't surround my illness. Spurred by her newfound confidence, Whitney signed up for an online dating site in 2016, and here is where the love story comes in. That's where she met her 34-year-old old math teacher, Edward Mitchell. That was in 2016. Ethan joined the pair on their first date at a restaurant, and the pup was also present when Ed popped the question. The loyal lab even acted as the ring bearer and walked Sally down the aisle when the couple tied the knot last year. I had Ethan on my left, and my poor dad had to walk behind me, says Whitney about the big day. Ethan sprinted from the back of the church up to the front with the rings, as he does everything with enthusiasm and zest. The vicar took the rings, lifted them up to heaven as if they were a miracle that they reached him. So Whitney's transformation has also extended her into a professional life, and they gave her family that something that she never thought was going to happen. She is now the academic researcher and co-leader of Living Life to the Fullest, a university flagship project which explores the lives, hopes, and contributions of disabled young people. Living Life to the Fullest has been hitting up 74 universities, with a strike of action in February and March, to help disabled participants and families get the best that they deserve. So all of this wouldn't have been possible, her life wouldn't have been possible without the love of this dog and the support of this dog. So that's the original love story is, of course, the Whitney and her dog, because the love between a pet and their owner is sometimes stronger than any other kind of love, and him being so attentive and understanding, her symptoms so well and understanding when she needs help, and then as well, him, being so affectionate with her now husband as well is really quite a lovely thing. And then, of course, having the confidence from having this new outlook and lease on life. It's very, very cool that she, gets to have this now. So that is awesome, and I really loved that story, and I hope you did too. And when we return from our break, we are going to talk a little bit more about new abilities being shown and being present. This, you might have seen this in the news. It comes from a story in Arizona, and then a couple more stories about different abilities and how they're changing in America. So I think that might be our last story about Valentine. Oh no, there's one more story about Valentine's Day. I have trouble not putting stories about love in, so I hope that's okay with you. So yeah, stay tuned from the break. We're going to talk a little bit more about different abilities when we return. So don't leave. Stay there and enjoy. We'll talk to you soon.
Want to find out what movies to go see? Then check out the GSMC Movie Podcast. It's your ticket to the latest movies, whether it's a new blockbuster event, romantic, comedy, or action flick. This show has got it all covered. They talk some what to go see now. Don't bother. What's hot on Netflix and everything in between. That's GSMCpodcast.com/movie-podcast. When it's all about the movies, it has to be this new show. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Left off, we were talking about a lovely love story, kind of between a woman and her service dog, as well as a woman who gained the confidence to reach out online, and where she met her husband. So now, an emotional moment was captured when a young boy who was in a wheelchair was left awestruck by an advertisement featuring a child who looked just like him. So Oliver Garza Pena, who will be 2 years old next month, has a condition called caudal regression syndrome. Since the condition impairs the development of his lower body, he relies on a wheelchair to move around. Earlier this month, Oliver had been on a shopping trip with his parents at a Target store in Arizona when he caught sight of what was a clothing ad depicting another boy in a wheelchair. And he was floored. Today, Oliver stopped me dead in his tracks and turned back around to see a picture that he had spotted. He stared at it in awe, his parents wrote on Facebook. He recognized another boy like him, smiling and laughing on a display at Target. They continued. Oliver sees kids every day, but he never gets to see kids like him. This was amazing. I'm so happy that other kids that pass through here with their parents will see this. There's a lot of focus on representing diversity, but representing people with disabilities is just as important. So since they published the photo of the heartwarming moment onto Oliver's Facebook page with Ollie's World, it's been shared more than 30,000 times with the hashtag Representation Matters. Additionally, the post ended up reaching the newsfeed of the boy featured in the ad. And Ollie's parents were delighted over the chance to express their gratitude to this child for what it meant to their child. This post was shared so much that it made it to the family and the Target display. Thank you, Colton in Massachusetts, for making a difference, they wrote. This representation was very important, obviously, to the child as well to the parents, to be able to see the representation of someone like their child, like their baby. So it's really important to get these. When we say diversity, diversity means all forms of diversity. So make sure that we're getting it out there. A little bit more news on persons with different abilities. A 2-year-old boy with mobility issues, another 2-year-old boy with mobility issues, has been given a new lease on life after a team of compassionate high school students gave him a new set of wheels. Killian Jackson was born with a genetic defect that left him with impaired motor function. Prior to December, the youngster has either been carried out in a stroller or his parents' arms. But when Killian's parents started looking for ways to give their son more mobility, they found that motorized wheelchairs could cost thousands of dollars, and their insurance wouldn't be enough to cover the cost at Killian's age. Rather than shelling out money for a new wheelchair, however, Killian's father, Tyler Jackson, reached out to the robotics students at his old Minnesota high school. The Rogue Robotics team at Farmington High School has won multiple awards for their ingenuity. So when they were faced with the project that they could make a difference in the life of a 2-year-old boy, they didn't hesitate to accept the challenge. The teenagers used a Power Wheels riding toy provided by Killian's parents as the base for the wheelchair. In addition, they added more accessible customized joystick and a control to the chair. They replaced nearly all of the electronics and added a child-sized bicycle seat that they found on Amazon. They then used pool noodles as safety bumpers for the edge of the toy and added a 5-point harness to keep Killian safe inside the chair. None of these components were very expensive, but when the students finally got to see Killian happily zooming around the workshop in his new car, they said the satisfaction of the success was priceless. I think we won more than we do in our competitions, one student said. Another student said, instead of completing a task, we're helping change someone's life. And one more story before we finish this segment. A national park in Michigan has become the first to implement heavy-duty wheelchairs as means of allowing disabled visitors to enjoy their trails. The track chair wheelchair has been equipped with treads to navigate the steel hills and sandy trails of Sleeping Dunes National Lakeshore. The track program was launched last year as an organization that specializes in making the park more accessible to visitors. Here at Sleeping Bear Dunes, half of the park is designated wilderness, so these areas can't do a lot of maintenance or changes. Group board chairman Carrie Kelly told CNN, so the better option is to have a vehicle that can take a person into these areas so they can experience the trail as it is without having to make major modifications. The track chair can currently only be rented out for use on that 1.5-mile-long Bayview Trail. However, the organization says that the track chair has already been utilized by dozens of visitors. The track chair is free for visitors so long as they reserve it several days in advance. So if you're going to be going to this, make sure you make it in advance. The track chair is free for Friends of Sleeping Bear soon hope to purchase additional track chair for younger visitors to use by the end of this year. And they hope that other national parks will implement a similar program for their parks so that everyone can enjoy the beauty of nature regardless of their abilities. So these are all huge, huge, huge advancements and lovely stories about people with different abilities. So, this is so important to have the representation and the accommodation that these people have done to ensure that these persons with different abilities are getting the same experience in these things as the people that are able-bodied. So very, very incredible stuff to be doing, and very important for our lovely Americans who have different abilities. And when we come back from the break, I do have one more Valentine's Day story for you that I think you're going to like, so please stay tuned for that. It's a very, very sweet one. So stay tuned for that. And just a couple of other little supplementary ones before the end of that section. So stay tuned. That's when we return.
pets bring such joy to our lives, and the GSMC Pets podcast is here to share in that joy. We'll tell stories of pets finding their forever homes, acting in unexpected ways, being helpful, or just being silly. Whether you love dogs, cats, llamas, reptiles, fish, or you've never met an animal you didn't like, the GSMC Pets podcast is for you.
Welcome back. Before we left for the break, we were talking about some persons with different abilities being able to utilize some more public things. And now we're going to go to another story where a 104-year-old United States Marine veteran who has never celebrated Valentine's Day before has been left dumbfounded by a sudden deluge of love letters pouring in to his mailbox. William White, Major Bill, as he's now known to the internet, was awarded the Purple Heart after he fought at Iwo Jima during World War II and served a total of 35 years of active duty. He now lives in assisted living in a facility in Stockton, California, where a beloved member of his family, of the retirement community, one of his admirers, a fellow resident, launched a social media campaign called Operation Valentine, recruiting friends, family members, and strangers to send Valentine's Day cards to White, hoping to get 100 mailed. Even when White's wife of 42 years was alive, he says they never exchanged cards or celebrated the Hallmark holiday. So imagine his surprise when he was flooded with more than 70,000 love letters, greeting cards, and well wishes from all 50 states and several foreign countries. It's all just too fantastic, White told Reuters. It's something that I've never heard or seen, and all of a sudden here, like a ton of bricks, I'm speechless. And that's not the only sending cards story that I found. There is a couple of more. So this one comes from Eastern Ontario in an elementary school that was sending their best wishes to those spending Valentine's Day under quarantine. More than 600 handmade cards from students at St. Mary Catholic School and St. Peter Catholic School were sent to be delivered to an Air Force base on Friday, along with breakfast for the evacuees. I decided to write, "Happy Valentine's Day. I'm happy you're home," said 8-year-old George Baker, a grade 3 student at St. Peter. Nearly 400 Canadians have been flown to Trenton, Ontario from China as the country grapples with the coronavirus. Though the Canadian healthcare officials say none of the chartered flights have tested positive, the evacuees are facing 2 weeks of quarantine at the base as a precaution. I've been watching a lot of the news, and there's some rumors that people are saying they don't want them here because they don't want to get the coronavirus. I hope says 8-year-old Xander Sethwell. I hope they are feeling welcomed back, and I hope they feel not too shy to come back, says Lila Taylor, who's also 8. I wanted to put a positive spin on the coronavirus for students so that they develop a better understanding of what's going on and just be more open, says Kimberly Pretty, a teaching assistant at St. Peter. And one more, Valentine's Day is the perfect time to do good deeds in the name of love. So a group of Washington, D.C. based children did that for homebound seniors. Leading up to February 14th, the Department of Aging and Community Living partnered with more than 25 District of Columbia public schools and public charter schools to deliver charming handmade cards to elder residents who may have limited mobility. This is the 4th year that Cupid's Kids campaign had students volunteer to dedicate their time in this way. DC Department of Aging and Community Director Laura Newland told Good Morning America that Mayor Muriel Bowser is laser-focused on combating senior isolation in the district. It's something that she's been passionate about since the start of her administration. She continued, programs like Cupid's Kids are helping us bring our younger generations into this conversation and teaching them about how they can be part of the solution. We're proud to provide an introduction that will hopefully create lasting and impactful connections. On Thursday, Newland students from Charles Hart Middle School surprised seniors from Colony House and a senior home in Northwest Washington, D.C. with their personalized Valentines. Kevon Jefferson, 11, from Ida B. Middle School, created a card that reads, "Roses are red, violets are blue. I have a big heart. I hope you do too." Another student, Pedro Fiergo's card said, "Happy Valentine's Day. I hope this card makes you happy. I thought about my grandma when I made this card." I bet that made his grandma very happy, wherever she may be. And what's more, the students' efforts have absolutely not gone unnoticed. I just think it's really nice, them giving back to the older people for everything that they've taught us youth, and for teaching young kids that they're able to give back and support those, the elderly, and let them know that they're not forgotten because they're older. Principal Chevron Smith of Apple Tree Schools, Lincoln Park, a participating school, told Good Morning America. After being visited by the students this week, Dorothy Waltower, 83, from the Colony House said, "Is this a family gathering? This sure is a surprise. Bless you all." With each Valentine's Day card, students also received a blank thank you and a postage-paid envelope addressed with the schools to encourage ongoing connections with the students. I think it's so important for us to be reaching out to our elders and be including them in our celebrations. And what better a day to reach out with love than Valentine's Day? So again, I hope you guys all had an incredible, incredible Valentine's Day, and I hope you've been enjoying all the Valentine's Day stories. I love Valentine's Day. I love the idea of a day being all about love. Whatever love means to you and whatever relationship is the one that you're celebrating that day. So happy Valentine's Day again, and I hope you enjoyed all of our love stories. And I hope you enjoyed those. But now we're going to move on for our next segment. We're going to be moving on from February 14th because I'm recording this on the 15th of February, of course. So we're going to be doing our good news and history from that day's date when we return from the break, because I just can't get enough of it. And even though we already did the good news and history from February 14th, that was a bit of a special one just because in the recording break time, for me at least, we didn't get to cover Valentine's Day. So that's when we come back.
The GSMC Life and Happiness Podcast takes you on a journey of exploration. We'll discuss tried and true methods alongside the latest trends of how to best live your life to its fullest and happiest. From psychology to meditation, science to self-help books, the GSMC Life and Happiness Podcast will help you to discover what makes you happy and how you can live life being the best you possible. Download the GSMC Life and Happiness Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
before the break, we had a plethora of letters that were written and delivered to the seniors in our lives. And now that we're back, we're going to do the good news in history from February the 15th, the day that I'm recording. So the day after Valentine's Day, even though we already did the 14th. So on this day, 200 years ago, the civil rights activist and suffragette for women's equality, Susan B. Anthony, was born. While growing up in a Massachusetts Quaker family, she began collecting petitions to ban slavery when she was just 17 years old, and was soon leading protests demanding equal rights for blacks and women. She played a pivotal role in the epic battle to pass the 19th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, which granted voting rights to women in 1920, though Anthony did not live to see that day, tragically. She was proud that states were already granting those rights to women in Wyoming, Utah, Colorado, and Idaho. Her energy and stamina, which sometimes exhausted her co-workers, continued at a remarkable level. At age 75, for example, Miss Anthony toured Yosemite National Park on the back of a mule. Before her death at 86, having worked tirelessly for decades, she said of the moment, "Failure is impossible," a quote that became the motto for women's suffragette worldwide. In 1979, she became the first female citizen honored on a U.S. coin, which her portrait was minted on the Susan B. Anthony dollar coin. More good news from this date, February 15th in history. In 1564, Galileo Galilei, the father of science, who invented the telescope and the thermometer, was born in Pisa, Italy, the same birth year as William Shakespeare. So science and artistic genius, same year. In 1879, on this day, a ban was lifted on female attorneys arguing in cases in the U.S. Supreme Court. So finally, female attorneys were able to practice in Supreme Court in 1879. I think that's the year Ruth Bader Ginsburg started. Hey, I'm kidding. She is fantastic, and I love her, but she's getting up there. Amazing for her, isn't it? The first teddy bear was introduced to America in 1903. 1903 was the first teddy bear introduced into America. On today's date, the Beatles scored their first #1 album in America with Meet the Beatles, which stayed at #1 for 11 weeks and sold over 4 million copies in 1 year. So that was 1964 on today's date. I'm not sure how many people know Meet the Beatles and what was on it. It was I Want to Hold Your Hand. I saw her standing there, and this boy. Oh, Till There Was You as well. I Want to Hold Your Hand is just such a sweet song, such a beautiful song, and it comes just around Valentine's Day, that release. So that was a good job on their part, wasn't it? In 1965, the official flag of Canada debuted as a stylized 11-pointed red maple leaf designed by the Canadian historian, author, soldier, and teacher, and public servant George Stanley in 1965. That Canadian flag that we know very well was born. The Soviet Union, this time in 1989, was announced that the last of its troops had left Afghanistan 9 years after their invasion. Race car driver Dale Earnhardt won the Daytona 500 after 20 years of disappointment in 1998 on this day. And between 8 to 30 million people marched in 600 cities worldwide to protest the Iraq War, making it the largest peace demonstration in history on today's date in 2003. And on this date in 1946, the U.S. government's first all-purpose computer, ENIAC, was unveiled. The electronic numerical integrator and computer was a digital and programmable, and therefore 1,000 times faster than that of the electromagnetic machines of the day. Founded by the U.S. Army, newspapers called it Giant Brain, roughly 8 by 3 by 100 feet in size and weighing more than 27 tons. Can you imagine if everybody had that in their homes now? That would be very overwhelming. It had over 1,700 vacuum tubes, 7,200 crystal diodes, 1,500 relays, 70,000 resistors, 10,000 capacitors, and approximately 5 million hand-soldered joints. And on this day in 1987, Ben & Jerry's ice cream announced a new ice cream flavor, Cherry Garcia, inspired by the Grateful Dead artist Jerry Garcia. The infamous name was suggested by Jane Williamson, a fan in Maine who sent a postcard to the store's Vermont headquarters. So if you have a good idea for the ice cream, hit us up. It's a very famous, it's the most famous of the company's flavors, with its whole cherries and fudge flakes, and I really want some right now. Jane was invited to the shareholders meeting where she got a standing ovation and given a year's supply of ice cream. I think she should have a lifetime supply. I can't think of a better company I would have liked to sponsor something of it. And a very happy birthday to Jane Seymour, the British actress who became known as TV's Dr. Quinn, medicine woman. She was a member of the Order of the British Empire in 2000. So she was born in 1951. So that is it for our today's date in history. I hope you enjoyed that. I had to kind of power through that one. There seemed to be a lot of very important things on today's date. Personally, I think that the Beatles released that album a day late. I think that would have been a great release for Valentine's Day, so that people could hear those beautiful, beautiful love songs and serenade their loved ones as well. So yeah, there is obviously plenty of beauty in America, so let's try harder to see it, and let's come together as Americans. Yeah? So yes, thank you. Thank you for listening to the GSMC America Still Beautiful podcast, brought to you, of course, by the GSMC Podcast Network. I would like to ask that you please remember to subscribe to the show and write us a nice review if you can. Rate the episode, of course. That really helps us boost the numbers. Also, please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We could use the support from you. And then we'd use your feedback. So thank you so much. And have a great night.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts, America's Still Beautiful podcast, part of the GSMC Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcasts on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type in GSMC to find all of our shows. From the GSMC Podcast Network, from social media news to marketing news, and even weird news, the GSMC Podcast Network has you covered. You can also follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's episode of the Golden State Media Concepts, America's Still Beautiful podcast.